technology when one of the great nuclear things, nuclear reactors were being moved across the deserts of the desert at Gary. They used the identical method the ancient Egyptians used. This is the high technology, the 20th century, looking for a method that was the most practical and efficient method for moving a heavy object across the sands. So you're not dealing here with primitives, in spite of the ancient nature, in spite of the time, the prehistoric time of these cultures and civilizations. You're dealing with highly sophisticated people, a state of mind, a consciousness that made it possible for this extraordinary leap to occur. And the peculiar thing about the Olmec is that that leap occurs with all the Egyptian elements in it. It had its own native elements. It had its jaguar. The jaguar is not Egyptian. Nobody in Egypt or Nubia has a jaguar that they worship. There's a little cat cult in Nubia which I noted, but it's not equivalent at all to the great jaguar which prowled the swamps of the Olmec. Why then suddenly they start with things which are duplicated nowhere else in the world in such a complex, in such a combination, in such an arbitrary combination? The stelae with the hieroglyphs, the monumental sculpture, the sarcophagus, the pyramids, the step and the true pyramid, and all of these elements, even including, as I have shown, the bird and the serpent on the crown of the Egyptians and Olmec, and all of the monarchic traits, a whole series of monarchic traits that distinguish royalty in the Olmec world and in the Egyptian world. Clearly, we have evidence of some kind of body of people who came into the Olmec world at that time. And there is a reason for this, because people have asked, okay, fine. All right, people can cross the Atlantic, fine. You have proven they have boats, fine. But why did they come here? The Egyptians have no business in the Atlantic, which is true. The Egyptians have no business in the Atlantic. The Atlantic is very, very far from Egypt. And Egyptian ships have no right in the Atlantic circa 800 BC. The reason why they are in the Atlantic at all, in the North Atlantic, is because of an unusual situation that is occurring in the Mediterranean at that point in time. It is very important, therefore, not only to study what was happening in Mesoamerica, but to study what was happening at that point in time in Egypt and Nubia. What you have is a war going on between Africa and Asia. The Asiatics are attacking everyone in the Mediterranean. They have smashed the Hittites. They have taken iron smelting process from the Hittites. They have smashed the Phoenicians. They've made vassals of the Phoenicians, who have always been servants of the Egyptians and the Nubians. 50% of the Egypto-Nubian navies are Phoenician. These are people who Sheikh Anta Diop claims were once black, who, like the Arabs who were once totally black in Saudi Arabia, became mixed with Asiatics, and you get this what you call the Semitic type. So that you have a mixed type Phoenician, which it gets black again as it enters North Africa and begins to intermingle once again with black people, until by the time of Hannibal, the Phoenician or Punic type is African. This type is restless up and down the Mediterranean. It has its cities at Tyre and Sidon, its great ports, but it's restlessly moving up and down the Mediterranean. And because the Asiatics blocked the seaports to the Indian Ocean, blocked the seaports to the Pacific, and we do have evidence of the Egyptians in the Pacific. We have Egyptian script found in Hawaii. These guys are ranging far out. Nothing stops the Egyptian. Wherever you go, you find him. I have found him in Spain. They have Egyptian villages in Spain, where Barry Fell has shown the cartouches of the Libyan kings around 1000 BC are found at Almunecar, Spain. And that runs right through the Spanish mention in their early chronicles that Taharqa, the Nubian general who is later to become the king of Nubia and Egypt, enters Spain with a garrison, so that the Africans are already in Europe. They're invading. They come in with a garrison into Spain, and then they retreat back because they have their own problems at home. So that we have evidence of movements in the direction west of the Mediterranean towards Africa, towards that part of Africa. And more fleets were driven, both military as well as commercial fleets were driven west of the Mediterranean, because tin was needed for the bronze armies, because this was the late Bronze Age. Copper was needed in Cyprus, tin was needed. They went right up into the British Isles and the North Atlantic searching for tin. And around 600 BC we have the Phoenicians going from Ezion Geber and going right down and coming right across Africa, right round Africa, right back into the Mediterranean. The Europeans did not go into the Atlantic because the Europeans were terrified of the Atlantic. The Europeans spoke of the Straits of Gibraltar as if there were monsters in the sea. They did not attempt any movement in that area. But the Phoenicians did, and they were very much tied up, as I say, with African navies. That is the reason why many of the great heads have military helmets. Not all of them do, but they're distinguished by military helmets. They are a warrior dynasty, because this is a period of war. For nearly 200 years, the world is in a state of war, as we are. Since the 1930s right up to the 1980s, every major army in the world has been ready to fight. We are in that state in which both the Africans and the Asiatics were. We cannot relinquish that state in this century until there actually is a war, which God forbid. But we cannot relinquish that state. All armies are armed to the teeth in the 20th century world. Regardless of whether you go down into Latin America, whether you go into the Caribbean, whether you go into Africa, whether you go to Israel, whether you go into Russia, whether you go through Eastern Europe, every army on earth now is armed to the teeth, ready and waiting for the conflagration, which, pray God, may never come. But that was the state of the world, where therefore a warrior dynasty appears with the great helmets. The warrior dynasty appears among the Olmec, carrying all of these elements. You find that apart from the stone heads which we have seen, we see cultural traits which I have mentioned, and then we go on to see, as I have also mentioned, that when the Olmec move out of Levanta and they send parts of their elite out at Tlatilco, at Cerro de las Misas, and at Monte Alban, when they study the skeletal evidence right in this territory at Monte Alban, when they go to the graves in this very part of Mexico, in Oaxaca, when they go to the graves of Monte Alban and they look at the ruling class, not the common people have nothing to do with it. The common people are Zapotec, later they're Mixtec, etc. But the ruling class, when they go into the graveyards, 4.5% of the ruling class here at Monte Alban is African. As much as 13.5% at Tlatilco is African. They're not in the common graves, and you can tell because side by side with the native, you're finding a different nose bridge, which remains in skeletal evidence. There's a ridge, there is a nasal index, there is a brow ridge, there are structures of the jaw, there are lengths of the arm. The African arm is different from the Asiatic arm. The lengths, the proportions of the body are different. You find not only skulls, but extended skeletons for study at Tlatilco. And where